Hello everyone, and thanks for joining or watching latest access control enhancements in Azure SQL here at DPS 2021. Yeah, I'm Andreas Wolter, Program Manager in the SQL security team, and I'm going to walk you over some of the new functionalities that we added in the space of authentication and authorization. All right, so that's the brief agenda. Authentication and authorization split up into what is just has been released and also what will be coming. So this is one of the first places for you to find out what will be coming out in the near future. Let's start with authentication. Recently we G8 the support for AAD service principal, creating users on behalf of the AAD service principals. So this was a common ask that customers needed to be able to have the service principal be able, or the AD application also sometimes called, to be able to call to create other users. So that is one of the functionalities that we just released. That's working now. Another one in long-term ask is the full support for AAD guest users. So like in B2B scenarios, you would invite a guest from another tenant. There were some limitations. You had to make him a guest or a member of a group and then add this group as a user or even as an Azure SQL server administrator. Now you can just do it directly, add the guest user as a user in the database, or even set it directly individually as a server administrator, AAD administrator. Yeah. All right. So these are functionalities that we just released. They are working now. Now, what's coming next in the authentication space is Azure policy enforcing the server creation with AAD only authentication. Specifically, this means if you deploy a server that has this bit AAD authentication only off, that the Azure policy would block this. And it doesn't matter which APIs you would be using, templates, PowerShell, etc. You would have to create the server with AAD only on. So that's one thing that you can do in the future. Use Azure policy to enforce this setting, AAD only authentication. Also coming up soon in November is user-managed identity support for Azure SQL. And we are working and will be previewing the support for AAD logins for Azure SQL database. So right now we have users based on AAD accounts. In future, we will also have logins that you then can add to individual databases as users based on the login. So we are trying to close this functionality differences between managed instance on premises and SQL database, where you would have a login at the server scope and then have users at databases. AAD logins are coming. Yeah, and they can also be based on AAD groups. Okay, since we just released AAD only authentication, let me just give a brief reminder what that is. So let's say you have your Azure SQL database server. This is my server here. I have the setting under Azure Active Directory, Azure Active Directory Administrator. I have set it to a given account here. And let's say I want to connect to this server. I can do this also with the server administrator account. I call it SSAA here in my case, or I could put any other SQL account here. Let's say I'm using this account here. That's a SQL account with a password, not an AAD account. And let's say you don't want to allow this. You really want to enforce that only AAD accounts can be used. Then you can actually set this bit here, save it. And then if I try to do this again, try to connect with a SQL account, log in this case, I will get this error message, login failed, Azure Active Directory only authentication is enabled. All right, so no more connecting the SQL accounts. I would really have to revert to AAD accounts, and that way you can enforce that. All right, for the rest of the demos, I will need my SQL accounts again. So I'm gonna turn it back off. And we should see that I can again connect with a SQL account. Yep. All right, so that's AAD only in a nutshell, and that you can then enforce with Azure policies, as I said. All right, looking at authorization space. You may have seen just announced server roles for Azure SQL database. If you're familiar with Azure with SQL Server on-prem or managed instance, you would find server roles is not really a new thing. All right, it exists in managed instance in SQL Server, but in Azure SQL database, since we don't have this concept of a real server, it's a logical concept, and the actual databases can be spread across multiple different physical servers. That's where it becomes a little bit more complex to say where is my actual login metadata stored. But we found a way, and this is basically then what we enabled. We created a concept of server roles in Azure SQL database, and it gives you the feeling just as it would be in on-premises or SQL Server managed instance. So for example, if you were to go to sys server principles, and I need a different account here. You would find that we have a bunch of new server roles. Not all of them are really relevant for a SQL Server. There are some pieces that belong to Synapse. Let me find the other script. My script here, this one. All right, so these are the 3 server roles that we just released: definition reader, MS server state manager, and MS server state reader. Built in, fixed roles. So what are they good for? All right, so the idea here is, just as in managed instance or SQL Server, you would like to probably have the same permission applied across multiple databases for certain activities. So the typical activities where you would want to have the same permissions across multiple databases are related to performance monitoring or security auditing, anything that just looks at all databases at once in a way, right? Performance data, how is my server performing, which indexes, doesn't matter which database are fragmented, etc. So that's a case where you probably want to have simply one account that can look into every database and with the same permission level. Whereas when it comes to like executing procedures or selecting data, most databases, you don't want the same account to look in all your hundreds of databases in the same server. That would not be such a typical example. Either way, so we started with those 3 server roles, pardon me, definition reader, server state manager, and server state reader. And let me show you what they actually contain. So if I go to the script here, what we did behind the scenes. So first of all, I added a bunch of logins on my server. The login name here is server state reader, definition reader, server state manager without the MS underscore. So that's the prefix that we're using to differentiate from potential real login names. All right, so on the left-hand side in my script here, we see the login names, SQL logins here in this case. We did not expose server level permissions. That is not what we're doing, but we have the ability to use metadata functions to check which permissions these accounts have. So let me start with the definition reader. So I'm just logged in with definition reader. That's an account, and I can use the is server role member definition reader function. Which permissions do I have at server level? And I see a bunch of permissions here. Some of them should be new to you, to be honest. I will come to that in a minute. But main importance, we do have server level permissions that are depicted here, even though we don't have the ability to grant you individual server level permissions. It has to be done via these groups. And if I'm a member of, if I have a user in a database, like in this case, I'm actually connected to a database called AWO, then I would see that even in this database, I have a bunch of permissions. I have connect permissions because I'm a user, and then I have a few of other permissions like security definition, etc., which come with this definition reader. Now let me log in with the server state reader. So that's a typical one that you may want to use for performance monitoring analysis. Right now I'm connected to master. Very brief, I have server state. That's the general permission that is not new. But I also have these two new permissions, security state and performance state. They are essentially just a subset of server state. So don't need to be irritated by that right now. It's all good. If I'm on the master database, I can also check my permissions on the data master and the database scope, and I have view database state. Because I have view server state, I have view database state if I am a user in a database. So that's the connection here. And again, we also have these two new additional permissions. So with this permission, I can run statements like system exit query stats, and that would actually give you all execution statistics from all sessions on this given instance. Exit sessions here. So normally you would only see your own data here, but because of this permission, you can actually see all other user sessions as well. And you don't need to be a AED admin or server admin anymore. That was the only way to do it beforehand. Yeah, the third one that we create is the server state manager, and that will have permissions like alter server state. I will not run this right now. Alter server state basically is a superset of view server state, so it also contains view server state in addition. And we made a bunch of improvements permission-wise in the details. So alter server state is not a new permission. Also view server state is not. But we adjusted the permission requirements for a bunch of DBCC statements and lowered them. So you can actually run as a DBCC SQL perf SysDMOS weights that's clear. If you have the server state manager role, you don't need to be sysadmin or anything like that anymore. So we lowered the permission requirement to alter server state for this specific DBCC statement, and some others we even changed to a view server state. So that's all documented. So I'm hoping that this is very useful for performance analysis, where you would still want to avoid granting elevated permissions. All right. So you saw that there was a bunch of new permissions in that you may have not seen before, unless you already played a little bit with Azure SQL database and looked into metadata. They have been there for a while, but not documented, and they are still not documented. But we are working on that. So that's the heads up here. There will be a new permission view server security state, GA, and view database security state that covers specific DMVs only. Today you have the view server or view database state that just gives you access to all DMVs. I decided to split that to make sure that you can grant a performance analyst access to performance relevant data, but keep him out of anything that's security sensitive. So basically I made a split of the server state or the database state permission into two permissions. The second one is then the view server, respectively, database performance state. So security state and performance state together would be view state, view server or database state, each being a subset. Now, the more important one is the security state. that is really just fixed to security sensitive information, whereas the performance state is just the whole rest. It's not necessarily that every DMV there is directly performance related. It can also be more like static data and not performance relevant. But I did not bother to come up with another category there. Don't want to make it too complicated. So basically it's just a two split here. And maybe this diagram makes it a little bit more easy to understand. So normally you have these control server permissions. That's where the whole hierarchy starts. Then you have author server, and then you have view server below that. So these have all been existing before. Control database and view database state also existed before. And I basically just split the view server state into view server security and performance state, and the same on the database. So in the security state is about 12, I would say maybe 20 DMVs. So once it's GAing, we will publish, of course, the complete accurate list. And then the whole rest of approximately 800 DMVs that will still be covered by performance state. So nothing will break. If you use today view server state, you can keep doing that. But you could then either deny view server security state to exclude those, or you could really just change it to view server performance state. Either way, nothing will happen unless you choose to. All right, so that's the performance/security state permissions, all under the state. So it's the DMV related. There's another piece, these are the catalog views. Catalog views are not covered by state. They are covered by view definition. And there we have any definition for server level and just view definition on the database state. And here I did a similar thing, but not as complete. So here I basically create a new view any security definition permission, and below in the database the view security definition that again focuses on security sensitive data. There can be key information, etc., or logins and permissions. So it's really optimal for security auditors who really just want to see which logins exist, which users exist, which permissions do they have, but do not need access to performance data, and vice versa. And there is another one, more specific permission, a view cryptographically secured definition. This one is very special. It really just covers individual pieces of catalog views. So there are some catalog views that really contain highly sensitive data, like the crypt property in sys key definitions, or the password hash in sys SQL logins. So these are some objects that you may not even want to disclose to a security auditor, because potentially this can really be abused. You could try the rainbow table against a password hash, etc. So that's a way to keep this out of the hand. And today, those columns, actually the password hash, requires you to be sysadmin. So again, by lowering that permission to a new permission, I'm removing the requirement to always be running sysadmin, which also gives you other access to other things that you may not want to grant to a security auditor. So read access only to password hash is covered by this new permission. In a graphic, that's how it would look like. This new cryptographically secured definition directly under control server. It's not covered by view any definition. View any definition just contains a subset of any security definition. Again, here's approximately a dozen catalog views covered. So for a performance monitoring person, you could exclude this permission, for example, with a deny. I did not bring a view any performance definition. That did not seem so attractive to me. We will see, unless there is a high demand. Okay, so again, more granularity coming here. Why am I doing this? All right, so the background here is really, keep in mind, many customers want to really enforce the principle of least privilege, and there are some challenges to that. You also need to be able to work properly. So a performance analyst or tuner needs to have a way to access all system data, metadata, and live data. But since we keep sensitive data also in the same structures, this performance analyst would then be able to see sensitive data, basically, right? Your external consultant would be able to see all this sensitive data. And that's basically what some customers really want to avoid. It's actually a no-go for some customers that this could be allowed for an external entity. And by splitting that, you will have a chance to have him look only at the performance relevant data and keep that person out of the security sensitive data. So that's how the role is going here. All right. Here is another heads up. Ownership chaining. Now, unfortunately, I can't ask you to raise your hands. I would normally ask who knows about ownership chaining, but maybe you can pat yourself on the shoulder if you do know about it. It is a topic that very often will lead to questions and confusion or even surprises. Others certainly used to SQL Server for a long time will just naturally accept the way it works. So in a nutshell, in SQL Server, we have this special behavior, and it's really special to SQL Server and Sybase, where we have history with, that if you create objects, you have a owner of objects. So let's say a developer creates a table and a procedure. They may have been owned by the same person, that same principal actually. So the principal may then be either the developer's identity or it very often is simply DBO. And the point is, in SQL Server, it's very easy to grant permissions to procedures without granting access to the underlying tables at the same time, which is a very nice and nifty feature. So an end user can execute procedures or select from views without ever knowing where is this data coming from. So that's very nice, but what is the background? The background is that SQL Server checks who is the owner of the calling object, procedure or view, and then the called object, the table in the back. And as long as the owner is identical, he will not do another permission check, like does the end user have permission on the table? You only check the permission on the procedure or view. And because of this concept, it is really sufficient to grant access to procedures and everything just works for the end user. Very nice. But there's also a downside always in security if things are too easy. And that is that developers can abuse this concept. So if in the moment that you mix DDL access and production data, this becomes dangerous, then it's hard to protect against potential escalation paths there. So there are multiple reasons why I had to look at this functionality. The other one will come to light in future, but right now I can say heads up, ownership chaining will become an optional feature in a way. We will have a permission that is ownership chaining. So anyone who has that permission, he will just have the same experience as today. But you could then also deny or revoke the ownership chaining permission to a developer or from a developer. And then that developer cannot abuse the potential escalation path anymore versus a normal end user who's supposed to use views and procedure would probably retain that permission and still have the same simple experience that you could access the procedure but not see the tables behind, and you don't have to grant these permissions in addition. So you have a choice basically per principle to use it. So in every database, you can have it per principle in future. It will be database level permission, by the way, not per object or schema. You want to keep it manageable. Okay, so this is a heads up, no demo here. Probably by end of the year, you will see this coming around in SQL. All right, so this may sound very complex, lots of permissions and hierarchies and sub-permissions and tier permission, etc. So I'm fully aware of that this is not for everyone, right? Just want to use the feature and be safe at the same time. So at the one time, we need to have sufficient granular permissions, but on the other hand, we also want to have it simple to use, templates per se. And the way to do that is roles in SQL Server today in Azure SQL. So as I just showed you, there are 3 new roles right now that you can test right now, but we will see more roles coming up to Azure SQL server level roles. By end of year, a MS security definition reader, which then would be ideal for a security auditor, grants them access to, for example, SQL logins, and just those security relevant objects, catalog views. The one that's maybe even more exciting is the MS database connector. So today, with the definition reader and server state reader and server state manager, you would still need a user in the databases where that server state reader wants to read performance-related data. So you have a login and you still need a user in every database where you want to actually exercise the permissions. The permission is inherited, but without the user, you won't be able to log into the database. That is today. Even though it's a server level role, that's just a concept, you still need access to the database. To make that simpler for scenarios at scale, there will be coming a database connector role, and that basically just gives you connect to any database on a logical server, even future databases. Basically, anytime you log in, you can log into any database on that server, even if it just was created, as long as you're a member of that new role. And then in addition, with MS Server State Reader or Manager or Definition Reader, you can then basically exercise all these view database state or definition, view any definition permissions on any database without requiring an additional user. So that's how you would be able to work much more efficient with these server level roles, the database connector. So by end of year, yeah, and we're also trying to replace, or we will replace today the special roles that exist in master. They are database roles, but they have a server-wide meaning in Azure SQL. That's a little bit confusing concept. So since we now have an architecture for actual server roles, we will essentially give you the alternative of a real server level role, MS Database Manager and MS Login Manager. So you don't need to use the DB Manager and Login Manager special database roles in master. So we just have a more clean concept. You're either a login with a server level role, or you're a user with a user role. With a database role. Yeah, so those are some of the future roles that are coming. Okay. So as you can see here, there was a lot of more granularity already here. You can expect this to be the way to go ahead. There will be more permissions in future coming, leading to more granularity. So if you look at the recently published functionalities or new features, you will see that they mostly have very granular permissions and also less hierarchies. So for example, SQL Ledger is one of these features where we could apply this new concept. So more granularity and less hierarchies. Why less hierarchies? As you saw my screenshots or my small pictures, these hierarchies, while they are quite nifty to explain, they also create a problem, because if you have a permission that is part of a hierarchy, you will then also have everything else below it, and maybe you want to actually exclude that, or you only want to have access to these individual lower grained permissions. And then you will end up having to work with denies a lot, and then there will be very odd situations. And sometimes it's simply not possible to grant the right permissions because of the hierarchy that covers other things. So we're getting away from the hierarchies, and that you will simply notice by the new permissions are mostly directly under control permission, either on the server or on the database. And by that, you can individually grant them, and you're not bound to the hierarchy that covers them. So that increases certainly the complexity in a way, and that is where, again, we need to work with more predefined built-in roles. So you will see more of these roles coming in the future. More granularity, less hierarchies, and more built-in roles. So really the idea is here to give you more ability to adhere to the concept, to the principle of least privilege, to give just the sufficient permission, but nothing else that would come with it. That comes with it, but is not intended. So for example, today, DBCs, to cover DBCC, you would have to grant sysadmin, which obviously allows you to do many other things. So by having that permission granted by a lower permission or a new permission, you can then delegate that permission to somebody without risking granting too much. So that is the way to go in future. All right. Now a small teaser heads up here. Stay tuned for Ignite. At Ignite, we will announce something totally new in the access control space. What I put here is the name of the functionality that we have just patented, centralized access control for cloud-based databases. So all this work in terms of granularity and less hierarchy actually had another background also, to enable us to bring a completely new mechanism to assign permissions scalable, specifically for cloud-enabled database like Azure SQL database. So I won't get into details here, but definitely have a look at Ignite. There we will have a big announcement of a new functionality, keyword centralized access control, central and scalable. That is the key. All right. Yeah, I have some further reading here on the slides, which you will certainly gain access to. And yeah, so far, thank you to all the folks working here in the data platform geeks community. I'm a bit sad that I can't be in India like the years before, but I'm glad you're still watching. So, and also thank you for all the awesome support, as usual, top notch. I have time for questions now, so I will stick around. As you see, there's the time left here. Just wanted to make sure that I give my thanks to everyone. All right, so let me have a look at the chat window here. I'm gonna move it on the main screen. Okay, a question on masking permissions on database. Yes, great question, because I have the answer, and the answer is we already have that. It has just been released, I would say 3 months ago. We have now, so he's talking about dynamic data masking, where you have the unmasked permission, which in the past was only on database level. You now have it at schema level and at table level and at column level. So you can grant unmask on a specific individual column or table or the whole schema, in addition to the whole database, which is very coarse. So yeah, I have the answer for you. It's already out. Have a look at the security blog. What's the correct address? techcommunity.microsoft.com. That's where all our security blog articles are out. You will find an article there if you filter by Azure SQL Security. Actually, I can probably show it right here. That is a quick one. Azure SQL database. And the way, if you don't know this blog, to find security stuff, most importantly, right, we have this label thing here, Azure SQL Security, and we all in the team really stick to that and make sure all the security features get that label. So here's the news on server roles. And if you scroll down a little bit, you should at some point see, yeah, granular masking, Azure SQL dynamic data masking. It's a video, right? So we have it. All right, Murat. How do we manage access to non-Azure AD users to Azure SQL? Can we use a OAuth-based authentication to SQL? I am not sure about that. I'm not so firm in this authentication space. Let me think. Yeah, can you drop me this per email maybe? My email address is andreas.wolter@microsoft.com. It's here up there, and I will connect you with my authentication specialist. So I don't fall into the trap giving a non-professional answer here. All right. Yeah, thank you everybody. Thanks for watching.